Hello, my lovely students. This is Mr. Richard Ayama, one of your tutors for geometry and handling data, learning, teaching and applying. And I'm going to take you lesson 5 of your course manual, which is basic trigonometry, learning, teaching and applying. Now, before we proceed, there are certain things it is expected of you to know as students. That's relevant previous knowledge. It is assumed that you students might have been introduced to Pythagoras theorem from the SS core mathematics and in relation to the angles of right angle triangle. Now, these are the learning outcomes. In other words, certain things it is expected you should know by the end of the lesson. So by the end of the lesson, you, the student teachers, should be able to demonstrate the development and understanding of Pythagoras theorem in the basic school mathematics curriculum. Then 2, you should be able to use manipulative and other TLMs in a variety of ways in learning the Pythagoras theorem. Then 3, you should be able to demonstrate the value as well as the respect for equity and inclusion in the mathematics classroom. Now let's start with the definition of trigonometry. Trigonometry comes from 2 Greek words, namely trigonon and metron. Trigonon means triangle and metron means to measure. So basically, trigonometry is the study of the relation between the length of sides and the angle of a triangle and other relations that arise from this. Now, before we move on, there are certain terminologies that you must know. In other words, you cannot deal without before we move on, there are certain things you must know. In other words, you can't know without learning trigonometry. And these are, one of it is angle. I know you might have been introduced to angles in your previous lessons, but for the benefit of the doubt, let me give a brief description of it. An angle is the amount of rotation that one takes about a certain point. In other words, is the measure of the turn or the amount of turn that you take about a certain point. So let's say this is my point and I'm facing this direction, that's indicated with the arrow here. Let's say the arrow A, and the point is O. Now, the amount of rotation, where the rotation ends, that amount describes what we call an angle. And where the rotation ends, it also creates another end. Now, both where the angle started and where it ended, you see that it describes some kind of line segments. And these line segments are called the arms of the angle. Now, where the rotation started, that's A, and let's say it ended at B. The line A is what we call the initial side of the angle. The initial side. Then the side B is what we call the terminal side. Let me write it here so that it will be clear. It's called the terminal side. And the point about which the angle, the rotation takes place is what we call the vertex. Now for plural, it is called vertices. Now let's move on. Now where does angle comes in the case of trigonometry? Now before we can talk effectively about trigonometry, then an angle in trigonometry must be placed in what we call standard position. Must be placed in a position we call standard position. One may ask, what do we mean by an angle in standard position? An angle is said to be in standard position when it is placed in such a way that its initial side coincides with the positive x-axis and its vertices also coincide with the origin of the coordinate system. So I can say this my angle. Let me say this, I have this angle with the vertices O and the initial side X and the terminal side Y. So when an angle is placed like this, we say this angle YOX is in standard position. Now, another aspect of angle that we need to consider is what we call the coterminal angles. Now when we say coterminal angles are two or more angles in standard position with the same initial side and terminal side. I take it again. Coterminal angles are two or more angles in standard position with the same initial side and terminal side. A diagrammatic illustration is, let me just draw the coterminal angle. Let's say I have this angle. Then it goes this way. This one of it. Then this one comes to end here. There is another angle which goes this way. You see that both angles, let's say this is the vertex of the two angles, meaning they are all in standard position. Now this angle started from here, it went in the anti-clockwise direction and ended here. This one too started and went in the clockwise direction, that the rotation was in the clockwise direction, then also ended here. So you see that these two angles, let's say this is angle theta and this is alpha. You see that both angle alpha and theta are having the same initial side, and they are also having what? The same terminal side. So we say with this, we say angles theta and alpha are co-terminal angles.